And it starts with the discussion of death, and which is the sort of ultimate, most extreme form of experiencing what Dasein. Then it goes back to guilt, which is a less extreme form. Then it goes to conscience, which is something in it just all over the place. And why does it begin with death? Because somehow Heidegger trumps up this problem that have we got the whole of Dasein in our forehead? And the answer is no, of course you have it. Then why did you have it in the... So, if you just open the book to the table of contents, sort of tell you what you're going to explore it and make it immense. Another way to put it, there's many ways, and I'm going to tell you all of it because I feel I really have to justify why we have to ignore the simplest things. Well, these are parallel in Division 1. Thoroughness always comes before forgetfulness. Because thoroughness has to do what we are already, has to do with what we're pressing into. In an intuitive way, but does all come before the future. Even so, on 172, all along. And remember, all I'm trying to do is convince anybody who's skeptical that I've got a better plan for this than Heidegger. About which, a claim about which anybody might well be skeptical. So I have to convince you. Okay, so if you look on 172 where he starts to talk about the structure of the there, he does it by starting with the state of mind, that is disposedness, that is for finished life, and then having done the state of mind, he gets to the next point, which is to do understanding on 188. That's the way it makes sense to do it. Now, what is 170? Well, at the top of 174, he sort of lays out the relation of thoroughness to understanding. He says, and he starts out explaining that he's going to talk about thoroughness, which is the way it's thrown into the being into the there, and coming against that. Basically, I'm just trying to say that after all, thoroughness is delivered over. Trust you know that. So I'm going back now to 172. So when he talks first about that disposedness, right after the being attuned, and then he goes on, as I said, to talk about thoroughness, and that they go together, the equiprimordial state of, but he also lines them up in the order he does. I mean, they're enough in a kind of circular relation that since the understanding affects the mood or attunement, or the attunement affects what possibilities you press into, you could sort of do it either way. But the natural thing is to take where you start, throw it into the world already, and put that before the stand you take on it, which is the understanding part. So that, and put the past before the future. But that's not how he does it in Division 2. On page 11, back to the table of time, he does, in 68, the temporality of the understanding and then the temporality of stability. I think he does it because he pushed into the fact that he started with death, which is got to do with projecting to the future and understanding, and then he dealt with guilt and so forth. So he's consistent in Division 2. So what he reminded him, but he isn't. That I think is evidence that he doesn't know what he's doing. That there are sort of various digested levels of his manuscript that he suddenly handed in. Because on 275, I was just looking through today to see, I was surprised whether he didn't work. But on 275, for instance, he's got about 5 lines. 4 having, and then 4 sides, and then 4 concepts. In the future, in the order they are always in Division 1. But why did he switch that? Why not the same problem? Oh yeah, okay. On 326, here's sort of something kind of outrageous. That about 2/3 of the way, having taken up death first, I'm assuming you know that's the way to go. Yes, that's the second speech. On 311, we're supposed to do on 11. The where you've got your fingers, you see that, of course, no, the first chapter of Division 2 is death. And the second chapter is resoluteness. And the middle of the second chapter is 58. And that's a crazy way of organizing it. And lo and behold, on 6, he does it in the other order, the right order. This is 20 lines from the bottom. He says all ontological investigations of such phenomena as, you know, say death, make up your mind. Why not say death? Deal with that's how you're going to write your book. He hasn't put it together. Okay, so that's my argument for that. But the right way is to put guilt first, not only because, but it's also wrong, it's clear that death is a more radical, more total than guilt, which also has a kind of, but it isn't so radical. And it isn't such an extreme form of nothingness. And so that's part of the problem. And that's related to what I think is really confusing. So far, it sounds what I'm saying to me, probably university reason. But it's really important pedagogical issue. You'll see it when you don't have to go through all the suffering I went through and everybody else reading it in the order he published it. Because you imagine how it would have been. You can see how confusing it is when you see how you behave. Because in the face of guilt, you have face of death, you have anticipatory. Resoluteness is a lesser form of authentic activity than anticipatory. Resoluteness, and then back up and do guilt and resoluteness, then you keep getting told that as you do resoluteness, this isn't really the full thing. The full thing is only apparent in death. Well, you wonder why you have to do it that way, right? Just do the unfair thing. And then the other thing, which makes it even more, whatever. And that's, so when you do it my way, you do guilt, time, and resoluteness. And resoluteness, as he puts it, I'll give you a quote, and toward authentic resoluteness. So you ought to do that next. And if you read it my way, pedagogically, it's that it makes sense. Why did you do it that way? And for instance, on just one example, in 349, I want to show you this. Anticipatory resolution is some more full, more primordial, primordial than just plain resolution. And you would think you would start with the simple one and read up to the hard, the more complicated one. On page 349, note it's in italics. Now gotten to he's going to make this move that's working. Now he's going to be telling yourself, plain resolution, there's a point for it. It's got its half there in its understanding. So he's saying there's resoluteness in its own point forward, and if I told you X points toward Y, which do you think comes first in the guy's book? You think we'd have the thing that points toward the X that points toward Y, and then the Y that it points toward. Not in this one. And that's what I mean by when I was explaining it. In the order in which I think it makes sense, and I hope I'm going to say you wrote this code, say realize. Now that's page 10 and 11. You renumber the chapter. Roman numeral 2 is 1. Let me just call an Arabic one, just so the resoluteness in number 2. Then comes death. So the chapter Roman numeral 1 is in my Arabic 2. Then you can finally put the thing together as a whole in section Roman numeral 3, number 62, which tells you about anticipatory. And then you've got the whole picture, almost, although really, you have to go over now and grab historicality. This is founded on the floor. This is odd, having gone through a whole abstract discussion of temporality and remapped all of them. Then, and this is number 5 and number 4. Okay, and then finally we would get to how temporality is beyond in section 3, the last part, really number 6, all of them are lost already. Once you've done that, you can then map all of the prefixes to 6. Are you with me? I lost it. Everybody lost
I'm
it?
getting lost.
What?
Right. Yeah. It's got lost in the fourth, the second, and the third.
Why don't I try to write it on the board? It's going to encrypt to use the moment here by the field. So I'm going to say 1, 2, then 4, then finally you're in a position it's lost way back 5, 5, 6, okay, now then 4, and that's 6, 7 over, oh my god, yeah, that's got finally 7. I think that's it. Did it contradict anything I said previously? No, no. Now you can't see what I wrote on the board. I didn't have much. You could stand up if you want to see it. Put it up there, but I don't agree. It's too much. Are you all had a couple things here? Lots of people in a couple going like this up. So 2 is 1, then 1, 3, 5, 4, 6, 6, 7. Right? Then I got it. Did I make it work? Okay. That now. That's the end of that, which is I'm never going to talk about that again. Why I was finding it. Why I'm doing it. Now, you can look for it and tell me. I'm sure I haven't seen all of them yet. And I would like to have them all. Every time you see the order, yeah, it was together. I think that's why sometimes they're closing it. Anyway, these pairs, which I presume after a semester you got used to, which are always if you see them in either direction, why it's not going in both directions. The more interesting one, which I began to map out, but I didn't want to bring it in today because it'll make much more sense when you've got the phenomenon, is how many ways that resolution is somehow leads up to, is board, so forth, anticipatory. We rethink that because it starts with it. Well, then resolution somehow must be something else beyond that, or something. So you have to keep telling you, well, resolution is really is something that leads up to anticipatory. To keep me posted. Yeah, I've found about 10 such places. Maybe I found them all. Maybe I didn't. Now, where we go on to the next, all this formal stuff, I'm sorry to say, we have to get out of the way. And we will get into the content before we go to the The next thing on my list is formal indication. Really, that was another thing I didn't know. You can't take any sense out of what he has to say about guilt and death. You don't understand that it's all done in the method of formal indication. Remember, formal indication is always finding some provisional way of describing and then investigating it. And almost always finding look for it. Maybe next time. Formal indication always starts out with some property of what it's talking about. Not always, but usually starts out with some description of what it's talking about, which is dead wrong. And you can be almost sure that the first way you pick up whatever it is you're trying to describe is from a Heidegger point of view, not only dead wrong, but from motivated. It's a cover up. Then this is one step beyond Christian and Richard's designation, because Christian doesn't think that gold and peace like paid for you by showing up in your life in a way that this is the way they really are. But Heidegger thinks that guilt, or that's the only one, sure, those are the big ones. Anyway, they're going to show up when you start to try to describe the human beings are. You can be sure that that's going to turn out to be only not finding right. It's going to be 180 degrees wrong. It's going to cover up what's really going on, and moreover, that's why it's so. It's a business. And why you have to do guilt first is because guilt is the clearest. By the time you get to death, it is so murky that you can't tell where the ontological right understanding of death. But if you keep your eye on it, you can at least be looking for what you ask yourself. What's the really wrong description? And how is it 180 degrees? What is the right description? And how is it once you have the right description, you can understand that the other was the wrong description? You'll see that so clearly in the guilt chapter. I'm going to explain it today. And then, in spite of the pause, we'll have to find out ways to do. Where are we? So you remember that the formal indication. By the way, you just I think when I talked about it last, I talked about it. Didn't I really designate good? You. Well, we don't need to answer. But on 274, Sunny mood, because it's a mood about formal indication, that the case of formal indication, which is a little bit off, the provisional sort of guess that you did turns out to be right. If I were going further in the right, but anyway, if I were doing it, I would say he doesn't introduce God's mind. Because he says we're formally, here he says on page 274, we're going to formally indicate God's mind as the being is being of the nature for it. You see that already, beginning of revision 1. But when we came to our, referring back to it, when we came to our analysis of this being, we took as our this in anticipation, that's the provisional. We designate it as the essence of God's mind. This term, existence, formally indicates. That means we don't really believe it yet. So we're going to give it a try. At least pick out what we want to talk about. Formally indicates that God's mind is within its being, makes the truth of that being is God. You see his problem? His problem is he wants to tell you the right answer provision. But really the method would require us to tell you the wrong answer, the answer that's always the answer which actually covers up the right answer. He should do that with God's mind. But then that would make sense like this. I mean, he's got a serious problem there. I don't know how to help it. Because it would make it hard enough to understand the book without being later discovered. Is an issue for it. But here's how it would go. It would say, we want to talk about human beings here, and we're going to provisionally call human beings rational animals. And then we're going to discover that more we look into it, that they're not rational at all, and they're really not animals at all. And all we're going to say, we're going to describe the structure of God, of a being, and we want to know its nature. And it's got an essence, and it isn't just a structure. It's got a nature like plants and animals, and we're trying to find out what that is. And then, of course, we'll find out that's wrong. But it would be so confusing to just do it. But I'm doing it just to show you that there's a symmetry of it. Always, the way the hermeneutic system works, it's bound to be something which, in its everyday manifestation, which is the only thing you've got when you start, is bound to be not primordial, not authentic, not disclosing of what is. Just follows from the Wildline. It's clear that everything you discover, what you discover important about God, the one is giving you the wrong answer. I may be about to get to reading my notes. If you join formula, it's pretty clear. And if you don't believe in will, it's not talking about it. And you can see him coming close to saying at the bottom of 15 lines up. All ontological investigations of such phenomena as guilt, conscience, and death must start with what the everyday interpretation. Because Dasein has fallen as its kind of being, the way Dasein gets interpreted is for the most part inauthentically oriented and doesn't reach the essence. See, this is all formal indication, it's just not using the term. Fourth, to Dasein, a primordial appropriate ontological way of formulating questions remains alien. So you're gonna, but whatever we see as to the primordial idea of this topic, again, it's not like 50. And it isn't as if being something yellow. And it isn't, we covered that up by calling it being. But if it's true, that if it's the case that the wrong story about guilt, anyway, Dasein has a stuff. If it's true that the wrong story is always a motivated cover-up, then it's true that when you go grab hold of the wrong thing, you've already got a clue. It's not, if something is revealed about this, the way they come and why they come, as you'll see. And that's And that paragraph is really telling you that this is testimony. This is formal. Maybe they're in the German. I once went through here and discovered about half the time later call says formally. So anybody who's reading thing and signals that it's there. Now, yeah, it's the same point again. I'm going to read it. Everything we do. I'm just going to say not only is it wrong about God's mind, yes, or let's start like say John Searle, that what with it's a mind. There are all kinds of wrong ways of the provisioning of the primordial. You know, it just occurs to me. Of course, temporality too. Turns out that we've got a view of time as a sequence of moments measured by a clock. It's not primordial. It's way left behind the primordial phenomenon every day. So that again, he never says that I don't think, but I didn't notice it, but I never looked. I wonder if he does anything like a provisional claim that he's doing a provisional. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know where. But he should be. I mean, he could be. He could say it, but that's what he's doing. So let's see. I'm going to read the first paragraph of 341. This is my last methodological. I'm not rushing to get the guilt because we haven't. I'm supposed to have read the guilt. Something over with my footprint on your own. I can't resist getting there formally to work with him. Anyway, we will take the first full paragraph on 341. We must first show how the only phenomena with which the ordinary interpretation has any familiarity point back to the primordial meaning of the call of conscience when they are understood in a way that is on ordinary understanding. There's another one on the list. Our ordinary understanding of the call of conscience is all totally, exactly 100%, 180 degrees wrong. Just to give you a clue about what that might mean. Everyday people, the conscience is some kind of voice that calls us, tells us what to do, gives us moral advice, scolds us when we've done something wrong. All of that, I mean, if that's all, you'll see the quote in a while, the voice of the one. Real conscience doesn't say anything. And it doesn't call you to do anything, and it doesn't scold you for doing anything. It's different. And it's so creepy, real conscience, that cover it up with this everyday story of what they are and when he violates them. So he's saying that he's going to do, he's not going to find the ordinary interpretation. The one that we've got is not an ontological appropriate. We must then show that the ordinary interpretation brings the limitations of the way God's mind. That's the motivating trouble. We incarnate. And since falling belongs to care itself, we must show that it's by no means accidental. That's the cover-up. It's not right. It's obvious. But it's no accident that that's what's wrong in the way it was tried to cover up something anxious-making and hard to understand and hard to live. The ordinary conception develops. Like anybody who wants to say anything.
Maybe I'm jumping a little too far ahead, but what you said makes me wonder, is Heidegger more relative?
Okay, let me think. I think the answer is, well, I'm just going to put these two things in the same, but the intelligibility isn't.
Anything about the concept?
I see. Well, except it could be more what he could see. It could be that we just get confused. Because there is a strong essential statement that God's mind is intrinsically a moral relative. If it's a structure which is not relative, it's true of all God's mind, if all the rules of the Bible or whatever your culture is telling you what about morality is, and yes, fine. I can't really answer this if you are, but next time you're going to find it. Even though you can work out the difference between a good life and a bad life. That's part of it. There are no moral guidelines, no more rules, no sort of Kantian belief in autonomy or but there are good guys and they have good lives. And it is paradoxical, but it's terrific. It's brilliant. I think it's right. I was offended. You next and then you. Yeah.
I'm just trying to recall from the Division 1 slide, the discussion of self-law and refining related to the moral element argument. Would Heidegger be considered a cultural element?
Absolutely yes, and then again absolutely no. In the subject version, there are certain universal characteristic of godline in all culture. And in some ways, I think the good guys do it, but principles or rules or human nature or anything across culture. In that way, we can make age be valuable or age be junk. Old people can be valuable or they can be junk. Cultures can be anything like that. And in that way, these are cultural relatives. But there are these structures in God that any human being has a world, and there is something like, I forget good guys and bad guys. The authentic ones and the inauthentic ones are going to be the same from the black forest to, I think, those are things. There's no ground for anything we can find, and yet, by formal indication and working it all, which, amazingly, can help us distinguish between, yes, exactly, and authenticity. But you're asking, that's what makes this book so Christianity of the Judeo-Christian tradition and our sense of the same thing about ethics and morality and stuff. But he's managed to say it is much non-realistic, non-leveling. He's trying to say a kind of way of having like moral judgment in a time in which we are in a certain way caused relativist ideals. And that's what makes it so important. Take them, okay.
At the close of Vision 1, you said something like that Heidegger wasn't saying that there is no supreme good or being, he's just leaving that open. But isn't it deeply implicit?
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Really?
On the podcast, and even.
Wow. I don't agree with Dreyfus.
I think you were referring to God.
Wait a minute. I'm saying, say that again.
He said, I believe, if I'm right, that Heidegger leaves open the question. He's not saying definitively that there is no God or supreme being or absolute. He's leaving that open for each individual to search themselves.
That's right, too. Yeah, that is right. That's right.
But isn't it deeply implicit throughout being in time that you can't have something like that, because when you enter into anxiety, what's revealed to you is not a divine order, or it's just nothingness. And that's inherent to the situation of anxiety.
That's a good question. I see what you mean. Let's think about a supreme being who reveals to you the moral order and somehow saves you after you die. I have my intuition is Heidegger at least brain say. I don't know what everybody wants to say, but he takes the stand that that's none of his business, that that's existential and not existential, and nothing he can do to prove that there's no supreme being and no life after death, or that there is being life after death. And he isn't trying, he's no secular, naturalist kind of fundamentalist, and he's no Christian fundamentalist either. That's all just existential for him. So that means, but he leaves it open. Now your question is interesting, and what about anxiety? Doesn't anxiety reveal that you can't have that kind of grounding and security? Gee. I think I got him wrong. I think he does want to play both these things. I think he definitely wants to be somebody who says, it's none of my existential business what your religion and belief in the afterlife is. I'm going to tell you the structure of being unto death and so forth. But he tells you anxiety is a Grundbefindlichkeit. That is, it's the best fluid revealing experience. And anxiety is the experience of the groundlessness. Well, let's see what other people are thinking about.
I think you're getting yourself into this dilemma. I mean, if we take him at his word, all these structures is neutral with respect to authenticity and, we can try and generate an ontological ethic. There would be one imperative to be what you are, to be authentic. But he keeps saying over and over.
Okay, but I agree with everything you say, but he's put the argument one step further. But what about anxiety?
I would say the same. It's like the temptation is to read all these categories: authenticity, inauthenticity. One is sort of good, one is bad. There's an implicit imperative towards one. But with all these structures, I think he's really neutral with respect to them. He's just going to tell you more primordial structures, more sort of surface structures. And he keeps saying over and over, and there's no imperative to.
Well, I'm not convinced by that at
But-
all. What about the being in the truth and the untruth?
I think even like unless you do an esoteric reading in which you sort of bracket his own language and sort of try and get behind the language, he speaks over and over. He's not making any moral claims about whether you have to live in the primordial structure or at the.
I just don't recognize that description. Let me think about it. I think he's telling you exactly what it is to be authentic and inauthentic, and it's based enough to your groundless
I
to
agree.
be authentic.
He's telling you what it is to be each. I don't think he's generating any of the sort of moral imperatives that you and Eugene want to see
Well,
out of it.
he isn't, and I'm clear about that. Telling you any specific thing you should do
Yeah.
to live in terms of your anxiety. But there is a way to do it
Yeah.
in which the authentic person does it,
Yeah.
and you can tell the difference. That's the crucial thing.
You can tell the difference, but I don't think he's saying you have to strive to be authentic or inauthentic. Strive to
Try to be the wrong word. You're called to be
You're
authentic.
called.
That's what conscience
There's
is.
just possibilities that sometimes can get themselves into. You either are one or you aren't. I don't think there's any imperative that can be generated.
There's no imperative as sort of life, but there's certainly no way to choose. And it's whether you're going to be authentic or inauthentic. It's not up to your sort of willpower. But there is something like an imperative. Your conscience is not calling you and saying, well, you could be authentic or inauthentic. It's up to you. And your conscience is saying, you've got to be authentic. And the only way to avoid it is to cover up your conscience with the story we're about to hear. If your conscience is giving you nice, clear guidelines, it isn't. And when you're authentic, this is like, you aren't defending the idea that when you're authentic, there's anything that follows from that about what you should do in any particular case.
But you're reading, so the only imperative I think you get in Heidegger is become yourself having learned it. With Kinder's book, it's an ontological ethic, right? So the imperative, having learned it. So he's going to tell you who you are as Dasein, and the imperative is to become it. And the way you and Eugene are doing it is he's showing you the structures of Dasein, authentic, inauthentic, and implicitly it's become the authentic part. The other way of reading it is just he's saying these are the structures. You're in one or the other.
You have to get, and I still don't understand what to do with anxiety as a primordial disposedness. It's supposed to show you something. What's it show you?
I think it's a possibility of being. It's like these are all.
Possibility is that's more than that.
It's more than that. It's primordial. It's primordial. But I don't think he's gonna. I don't think unless you read against his own language, you're not gonna be able to generate an imperative towards the primordial against the one.
Well, unless you think what do you think conscience is calling you to? It's not an imperative to be authentic and face up to your anxiety instead of playing games.
I mean, this is what it's doing. It's not clear though that anything's wrong. It's not.
You don't think he agrees with Pascal that you shouldn't go out and cover up your wretchedness by playing billiards and hunting and dancing? Well, Eugenia has been involved in this, so let me talk next, and then you guys started. Okay.
You do. You want to do it. But it's like if you say that you have a conscience and something called okay, when we're calling that conscience.
That's interesting, but I do think it goes further. I'm following him. When he tells you that anxiety is revealing experience,
I think it's much worse than Eugene just even. Not only does he stop short of saying these things, he often says the exact opposite. So it's the sort of reading you guys are offering. It's not only an implicit. Well, with authenticity and inauthenticity, he says it over and over. Do not read this as an moral imperative to be authentic, as
he
opposed.
says don't read it as an ethic, doesn't he? Or not as a. I don't think he ever says that it's not an imperative.
You're not supposed to put any
look at a passage.
Any normative. There's not supposed to be any normative weight on these structures, any of them.
And no normative weight on telling you that anxiety reveals things in a primordial and privileged way.
I don't think so.
Well, I don't get it. I mean, I think he may be writing the book he should have written. I'm not sure. But let him first talk because he brought it up, and then you can.
It doesn't seem like you have to ascribe a moral evaluation to that. But if you're in the groundlessness and anxiety, it seems like only from that point and in that groundlessness is authentic trusting in the possibility possible, because it's in this revealed experience, if what is seen is an absolute cross-cultural, a historic value that you must ascribe to, then authenticity is sort of laid out for you right there, and then authenticity would kind of be following a roadmap, and it wouldn't be the owning of the self, and sort of the individual.
Maybe what this is a fascinating discussion. I just want to say something. You can say, Jim, you can say something. What you're really setting up is interesting to watch when we're about to see it. When he talks about guilt and conscience, and empty is this call? And what is Dasein freeing and covering up? And what would it be to lead a life that wasn't clean of anything? Does that have any conscience? These are the very questions that you're asking. How normative is, and I would say death too, but death is something, but in the guilt practice, and in the guilt practice, we ought to be able to see, if we're looking for it, just what kind, if any, we think can support. You want to say something?
Yes, just regarding the normativity of it, the lack of an imperative to be authentic. I think that makes sense. I think it would be difficult for Heidegger to justify an imperative to be authentic. He might say that your conscience is there and it compels you to be authentic in one way or another, but that's not an ethical imperative or a moral imperative sometimes that makes you do so. Even if it's a political imperative, whatever that is. But even if it's not present explicitly in daily time, I think in certain sections that sort of imperative is present implicitly. Like, for example, when we see Kierkegaard's influence on Heidegger, when he speaks of leveling, and just looking at his language, I mean, I can't read the German, but looking at the language in translation, it seems as though Heidegger has a certain resentment, I guess, towards leveling, and seems to perceive it himself, on a non-philosophical one, like both, as a negative thing. And he seems to have his own ideas about it. So, the impression I got, anyway, was that although Heidegger wasn't willing to take the step and make an ethical imperative and say, you should be authentic, he did not seem happy with people being inauthentic, if nothing else.
Well, maybe I could take over what you said and put it this way, that he thinks that there is a more or less primordial understanding than Gassman when it levels, and it covers up, for sure, the more primordial understanding of what it is to be done. That's already an important sort of thinking. Then the next question is, does any way of acting as what you could be doing, or any way of acting as what you should be doing, follows from this idea that there is a more. I guess I'm just stepping out on the limb. That one thing at least follows. Don't level, don't gossip, don't have a non-primordial understanding of your opinion, because it belongs to the very essence of being. Presumably, get it right. That is, don't cover it up. And well, then we're still not getting any. You don't know how much normativity you get. There is none. We are called to get that. That's the truth. And we don't know yet what follows. So again, we get a tweet. We started this. I mean, very interesting.
I'm going to throw one more thing out there. Isn't normativity itself always an existential? Because it's always normal to a time and to a culture and to a reestablished forehaving of a set of beliefs. And I mean, isn't Dasein at rock bottom just normally?
Well, again, it's all kind of getting clear what you mean by norm. There's not going to be any cross-cultural values or rules or virtues, but there does seem to be called to think what it is to be done. That is to take a stand on its own being. It looks like it's built in. There's a wrong way to take a stand on its being. It may become rougher, you're the kind of being that has hearing the diverging and fleeing cover-up. Or something that you're the kind of being. It doesn't have any moral normative guidelines, except that it's better manifested, it's called and required to sort of get it right about the truth of Dasein is, and there is one all across all cultures. It's a funny. I'm just trying to give you this funny feeling that there's something normative going on, but it's nothing like having rules, virtues, principles, rational justifications and all that. Something else. The name for it is ontological. Yeah.
Well, any particular norm, of course, he can be relative, but he's not relative like with Nietzsche. Because Dasein is an existential part of Dasein also. We are historically thrown. So in that situation, we are thrown into a situation where there are these norms and these different things we're called to, and we can respond in some way or another. So it's a particular, there's a strange kind of normativity that we deal with, but it's not, but there's nothing, but that sort of norm is not a constant norm or something that,
It's not in sort of Aristotelian norm either that you're thrown in the culture where they are. The thing is long in a very interesting way. I mean, you might say you're thrown into a culture and you got to do what the culture tells you is the right thing to do. And you're not saying.
no, I mean, it's not like it's not like it's also not, I mean, it's just, I guess I'm thinking more of just the nihilism that people are kind of concerned about is that Heidegger isn't a nihilist in that way, because you are born into a culture that you can take an authentic stance towards or an inauthentic stance towards. I mean, it's not an Aristotelian virtue ethics or anything where you should aim for whatever is the absolute, thing for your culture or something. But you're also not. We're not just completely free floating. I mean, it's a peculiar kind of ground.
Well, I think because it's involved. I think the resolution in answering compatible with doing all that on the background of whatever your culture is telling you is a good life. Do whatever you can be good in the way your culture makes it possible for you to be good. I think that's what the guilt chapter does. And then the death chapter just throws that out the way anxiety throws it. And so, no, that's it's all ungrounded. I'll tell you my intuition. The guilt chapter is going to tell you that the highest thing you can do, if you understand the call of conscience, is respond in a unique way to each unique situation by being an expert in the values and ways of acting. Is very was the guilt and conscience chapter. And he has this funny character of never obeying the general rules that one does, but doing the own unique thing, which can even look crazy for a while to the one. But they eventually come around to see that it was a terrific new move that the culture can set. So, but the promise, we want Aristotle. Aristotle is outside any kind of norms of the sort that you could find in science or in value ethics even, because that is, he's outside them in the sense that they don't tell him what to do in the situation. He just spontaneously, automatically does the appropriate thing at the appropriate time in the appropriate way. That's fascinating. Like, he's become a master of his culture. But what the death one says is, in effect, okay, Aristotle, that's all correct about that. But the interesting thing is, Aristotle and the Economists, they accept the whole background of values and virtues and understanding of what a human being is and should be, and within that, the Economist is a master of it. And thus, the second part on death says, all grounded, and if you think that there's a cultural sort of support for what you're doing, and that you're a master of your culture, that's fine. But you really aren't yet a full Dasein. The full Dasein who lives in the face of death understands even the very principles of their own culture is something Aristotle and the Economists don't understand. And that's where Heidegger goes beyond whatever it is you think he's doing, and goes beyond what I think he's doing, or should be doing, and he's doing something more radically near nihilistic thinking. He, Aristotle, almost does believe in it. He likes it. That's your point. Do what you're called to be a master. You understand guilt and conscience. Now, keep your eye open for the crucial case, which is what the one does, and responding to the uniquely, which goes with having no way to justify. When he doesn't say promise there, he just says the inauthentic person responds to the general situation, and the authentic person responds great way, without reflection, without justification, the uniquely appropriate thing.
Yeah, we need to take a touch on those now. I'm probably simplifying, but it seems like Heidegger would say that would be a cultural moral person, would say that sort of our imperatives come from from the one of our culture. It would be very difficult for him to explain something like, we've got concepts, I think, of like a true moral guy not following everything culture says, but, go against that and do the right thing instead. I mean, that was the idea that's not coming.
They're still, it's a higher version of the one. Yes, because if they can just say why they think it's the right thing to do, they're not the problem. The man of practical wisdom doesn't have a reason, can't justify. He just is so good at understanding the deep meaning of his culture that he will do what's appropriate. That's pretty radical. I like that. I mean, a culture doesn't make any sense. I don't know what you've read. Have you read Bourdieu's Virtuoso? The person who, I'll just tell you as long as you go on this part, the person who's understood this text, I don't think the virtuous people understand it very well. Whenever I read them, they seem to think that Aristotle, that the economists justify what they're doing and understands something like the general situation. Anyway, what Bourdieu talks, when he talks about the cultural virtuoso, the logic of practice, Bourdieu has an understanding of very Heideggerian, like all of them. Heideggerian understanding of what what he calls cultural virtuoso can do, that if he does it by deeply accepting the whole culture, I mean, Bourdieu and Heidegger, and only the feeling of just croaking, that's not what he's about. In the same way, only the experience of ontological death makes you sort of even free of your whole cultural background. It looks like it. I hope that's wrong. Yeah, Stephen.
But just a small point about formal indication to bring it back. Don't we have to be careful though, when you're talking about things like guilt and conscience, to remember that they are formally indicated as being guilt and conscience. You don't get to sort of read the normative or moral baggage attached to those phenomena. I feel that in the discussion we're sort of
Think about that.
bringing in a connotation with
Yes and no. I mean, you do leave the moral baggage at the door, so to speak, little by little. I mean, I don't think we're disagreeing, but that's how formal indication works. You have to start thinking that gold is that yellow stuff, and that lightning is those bright flashes in the maybe tricky kind of examples, but they're easier. The heat is what feels warm. You've got to start with things like that. And in this case, you've got to start with a moral view about guilt. If there are things that are wrong, and if you've done wrong things, you're guilty and so good. But you're going to leave all that behind, and that's sure. But whether you've left everything that has any kind of normative significance behind, keep your eyes open. I think, I've already just answered this. I think that if the Phronimus is an example of somebody who's done it right with conscience and guilt, it's got that much normative significance, no more and no less. Yes, you can do the appropriate thing at the appropriate time in the appropriate way, but you can't say why it's appropriate because there's no answer to that. It's just what somebody really understands the culture does, and not everybody, but just this person in this situation does. So that's true. There's still normativity in there, but it's been so sort of cleaned up. That's what we're going to talk about next. But it's all right to talk about it. Yeah.
Still a question to go back to.
Okay.
Cultural virtuoso and Heidegger we're talking about. For the cultural virtuoso being that virtuoso capability of sort of meditative thinking that I talk about, where he kind of reflects in a meditative, very deep fundamental way about being itself, how it shows up. Because it sounds like he's saying doesn't need to do that.
No, he certainly doesn't need to do that. I mean, a culture virtuoso person certainly is the most likely place to find one Heidegger in the planet. Forest, who never went to school, and certainly not corrupted by philosophy. That you don't need to have that. What you need is in my version, what you need to become a cultural virtuoso is enough sense of anxiety and not just believe the norms that your conscience tells you to cover up. Here's the rules, rationality required, and all that stuff. I got enough anxiety to fail to not accept, not believe that, not experience that. The present thing happen. Two, and then you've got to have, this Heidegger doesn't talk about much, maybe never, I'm not sure, keep your eyes open. Lots of experience in the culture of not doing what the norm, the general situation requires. And sometimes it works very well and everybody's happier afterwards, disaster, and everybody hates you afterwards. And if you have enough experiences like that and take them seriously, you get more and more skilled at being, say, in Greek. And the more skilled you get, the more of a mastery you get on the basis of a lot of trial and error that you take to heart, then you get to be astronomer. How you do it. And peasants can do it too.
Would that imply some sort of reflection?
That's such a good question. I argue with my. It can involve reflection, but it doesn't require it. This is how it looks. I wasn't going to. I'll include in the paper. I'm going to tell you the Dreyfus story about how you go from a novice to a master, because that's what I'm really talking about. To see Heidegger the way I see it anyway, you need and what did you just say?
Wouldn't it require?
Oh yeah, reflection.
Not necessarily rational.
Some kind of meditation.
Yeah, not.
Okay, here's the question. Just we're getting down into these wonderful issues just the two existential scales or Heidegger. Think about it. But the question is, if you learn by making mistakes, feeling bad about it, there's two ways you can go from it. You can make yourself and do some kind of analysis of this. You can look and you can try to figure out just what went wrong and make up your mind not to do it again. The analogy of that is something like the golfer, the famous one. Yeah, Tiger Woods did when he took apart his whatever and went back and trained because he saw that he was doing certain things wrong. Then he got worse. But after a while, he got better than he ever was. That's something like the form of meditative thinking. You try to figure out what you did wrong, you feel bad about it, and you try to get clear about it, and you try to fix it. But you can also just worry about it. And the next time and so you just decondition yourself from doing in the next situation what you did in the previous situation. Or you can really just feel good about it. Now I have to bring me in. I'm the only case I know of this, and my brother is skeptical. But I say that's how I want to be a good teacher. That's why I have to have the tape for the life, because I always listen to the previous one, and what I am thinking is, wow, that really worked. That was the right way to do it. I understood it better. They all understood it better. Or I think, oh my God, I just wasted 15 minutes going down the wrong track, and now they're more confused than they were when they started. I'm confused too. And then if you and I'm just conditioning myself to do that good thing again, and I'm feeling, because it makes me feel good. Do that. Don't ever do that bad thing again, because you'll regret it. And I don't think I ever analyze, or not very often, what did I do wrong to get me on that wrong track, or to get me on that right track, and so forth. So then I think that's a non-meditative, non-reflective way of getting to the astronomer. It doesn't matter to Heidegger how you get there, as long as you get to a point in which you don't anymore or even understand why you do. You just do it. And that's the intuitive mastery. And you can notice how cross-cultural that is, whether that's Zen master or a Berber, that which is like Buddhist studies, the Berber philosopher, or the astronomers, the virtue ethics people should be studied better than they are. Anyway, yeah.
Just relating this to the idea that the authentic person can act without justification. Is it that the authentic person acts entirely without justification, or that if they sat down and thought about it, they could justify what they do, but they just don't? I mean, I guess
I understand the question.
Relating back to the idea that it doesn't make any sense that the moral person could act without justification. I think it's understandable, but it's very terrifying, I guess, that an authentic person simply does something totally unjustifiable.
I think that's right.
They can't explain it to you,
that's right.
But it's just somehow very appropriate.
That's right, and it is sort of terrifying. But that's how it is. The virtuoso tells that you or themselves why that was the appropriate thing to do. That specific thing was the appropriate thing to do in that specific situation. They can't even generalize it to this thing that Kantians think you have to do. Because they're going to learn things and experience successes and failures in their behavior. And the next time they're in what is sort of the same situation, it won't look like the same situation. They won't do the same thing. When you get really good, you can make a neural model of this. There isn't any rules and representations. It's got to do with neural networks and chaotic attractors. This may not help some people. It may help others. You can make models of the brain which imply that there isn't any. You can't give your reason. You can't justify what you do. If you're an expert, you just do it. And that might be terrifying. Yeah.
But if it's appropriate in any way,
Yeah.
then aren't there reasons for which it's appropriate? Theoretically, if there are reasons, can't you
Well,
describe
no, there are not reasons why it's appropriate. It's appropriate because that's what online do, and other ones will recognize it. There are certainly some gross guidelines about what's inappropriate, and there are certainly for novices and even for just people who are competent and proficient, there are guidelines that you can give and reasons why it's appropriate, for instance, to give people their condolences, give the relatives condolences when somebody dies, so forth. But when it really gets to be a crunchy situation, and in specific cases, what you do and how you do it, you're not going to have any reasons at all. Yeah.
Would it help out in thinking that understanding is not prior a know-how and not an explicit.
That's right. It's a kind of know-how.
Right. So if you express a reason, an assertion of why you did something, you can't possibly express all the nuance of the situation and the know-how so that an authentic person might understand. Like sometimes it might be possible, but not necessarily.
You're more likely to be able to get another economist to understand, but even then, you may not. I mean, or the other economists in my picture take test masters will understand in the sense that he'll see that that was the appropriate thing to do, and he'll say, well, yeah, that was. But that doesn't mean that now they've agreed on what the rule was or the analysis was. All they agree is that if you played a million moves that you have to play to be a grandmaster, one of them told me. You made a million chess moves, that'll look to you like a very good move to make, and anybody else who made a million chess moves will probably look to them too like a good move to make, but they can't tell you why. Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
So, effectively, morality becomes a regular.
No, I don't know, that's a funny way to put it. That suggests that you use it as the record win. If you do it to get credit or something.
Okay, you're right. Insofar as it's just like the book we talk about, human beings like doesn't follow rules. Yeah, exactly.
Go to the next piece.
But the computer has to. I mean, and there's no actual governing. There's no mental content governing a guideline or decisions or actions. And that just as one can postulate reasons for opening the fridge and getting it for academics, making some point about
Nobody else probably lost haven't read it, but you go ahead with this.
No, this one's your
Did my hyphen?
yeah, second line of your book. Yeah. You mentioned how that
All you really need is the skill to get
Exactly.
30
So-
in your mouth.
exactly, and there's no reason action. So you postulate them after the fact that we weren't there. So it seems like it's the same with autonomous and moral. He will do the right action. He can later postulate reasons for having done it, but they weren't actually part of it. There were no decisions. There were no.
The crucial thing is that's all true. And the reason they weren't part of it, besides that there was no phenomenological memory of it, is that if you follow those rules, you won't get that expertise. You may
Yeah,
get
exactly. I thought about that.
Yeah, you may get that result in that situation, but the expertise sort of recognizes similar situations and does similar things, and there are no rules or the really important rules.
Therefore, an expert system or a computer or a robot could never be something that you can grasp the point.
Well, that's what's so funny. And I would say that the only people who grasp it are communists. People exactly clear rules and organization and expectations that many situations and all. So computers could do that. Maybe could do that. I don't think that's what morality.
Exactly. So they can never act.
There wouldn't be moral experts. We need to kind of. There must be somebody. What did I put in instead? Anyway, we don't have to worry about that. So what are we doing? Yeah, I said we'd be talking before. I can either go back to talking or I had all you said that you want to say. You got a lot of clearing up of things that were going to come up next time. But there's no harm in that. I will now know that I can. But let's start. I would love to start on the guild. You can see how it works. So you start with the ordinary experience of informing, you're picking out some things. You'd like to know the essence. You all you know, right? Stuff like that. What we call guilt. That's a big thing. Okay. And it has a much more of a connotation of owing. So when you have a debt, you are showing somebody a certain amount of money. So I got a lot of things. You. It's not that the German view of guilt is radically different than this. It's just that it's got this indebtedness component in it. It's a lot less. If it starts with this word, so you start with the person who is sure is somehow responsible for something and owes something. This is the guilty person. And Heidegger says, he's just analyzing our ordinary notion, his ordinary German notion. To be guilty is to be responsible for a life. That is, you owe somebody money, or you caused somebody something. You lead somebody who did. And guilt is, you're guilty when you cause this sort of life. And your conscience tells you that you're responsible for it. And you ought to, yes, that's good. Now, the next thing to talk about, somewhere, is the wrong way. Commentary marvelously dumb misunderstanding. Because what I say in the commentary is, well, it's not that you've done something wrong. This is my slogan. I understood that it wasn't, sorry, I'm jumping ahead in a way. What Heidegger was going to say was, now I want to say, well, what is guilt really? If it's not having done something wrong, because that seems to be just the ordinary, as he later said, I won't jump to it, that's what the one says. You've done something wrong, you had this, you didn't behave responsibly in the picture. And I wanted to say, well, what does Heidegger think is really the problem? If that's not guilt, if that's the one, what is guilt? And my answer I had tonight, the guilt, yes, cancel it, I just did. I can tell you now, we just wrote there. So let me go on without that. The guilt is Heidegger lacking in some way. If that's what one normally says and thinks, that in fact, guilt is some kind of, is the reverse of that. That idea is a cover-up of something else which is ontological guilt. And the interesting thing about ontological things to know is that ontological guilt isn't a bad thing. It isn't something it isn't something you should face. It's not something you did wrong. It's not even, and now here's my mistake. I said, no, it's not something you did wrong. Well, I said, well, you can't ever be clear about what you're doing. You can't be lucid and autonomous. You can't take full responsibility for the lack of. That's something you're going to read a lot in what we're talking about. When Heidegger says what ontological guilt is, you can't get behind your throne. What you're doing is stupid about things. It's true that Heidegger says what you're really. The mistake was to think that there's something wrong with you. Heidegger thinks that's fine. That's just, in fact, that's good. And guilt hasn't got anything to do with what's wrong with you. The test and the evidence is that the normal stop being guilty. Be lucid and really do what you're conscience. Or, the funny thing, and the interesting thing is, that's just an ontological fact about people. Everybody, all Dasein are all guilty, all equally guilty, and all the time. That's what's shocking. If you read this thinking that in any way guilty is a bad thing, or you get over it, or have less of it, or some people have less of it, there are two important points. One is I just said it, I'll say it again. Everybody, every Dasein is equally guilty, and couldn't be anything else but guilty, because whatever the essence of guilt is when we've done the formal thing, because we found out what guilt is, it's a structural feature of Dasein, and every Dasein has it just as much. You know you're on the wrong track, but guilt. That's what I was doing in the completely stupid thing. There's nothing wrong with Dasein, it has a certain structure. Namely, it can never get clear of what the world is. You can never understand what it's up to. You can't get clear about what it is that you need to learn. You're certainly responsible that you can't help being in, that you will do things for people. Then you would have that little bit of guilt. Basic structure that there's lots of what you be able to be explicit about, or take that structural feature. The second point is, it's not only a fact that we all, it's a good thing that there's something murky on the basis that we do whatever we do. That's what Ruth is talking about. Kind of identity, you don't choose it, it isn't a narrative. That's why I wanted you to read it, because I brought along, read it, the non-lucidity, murkiness, which is some way the positive, the origin of the work of art. And in the origin of the work of art, the name for this background in live is the earth. Every decision bases itself on something not mastered, something concealed and confused, else it would never be a decision. Now, what? That sounds, certainly you don't understand it when I just read it. What does it mean? Clearer what it means in regards to discovered it. But when it amounts to, you have to look at the other side of it. What would it, so that you could justify what you've done, you could recently clearly understand what you've done, and justify it as the right thing. What does that look like? Well, Jesse Gard said, when we break down the ethics, that if you act completely on principle, then, and you wanted to always do the right thing, you have to understand what, by some kind of principle, why what you're doing was the right thing. But then you'd have to understand, and you would be in a kind of redress in which you would be in, you would sort of that principles maybe for justifying your first order principles and principles for your second justify. But you are in a regress in which you never get to the self-justifying principles with regard. If you believe in revelation, so there has to be something which is not up from that, on the basis of which with a not explicit foreground, lucid reason or principle, because but here's a better way to put it. I mean, harder to. Suppose you were able to lucidly and freely what you were doing. Now we've got this one problem is how you would ever justify your principle. The more interesting one may be how your choice could ever make any difference and be a choice. You probably know some of you. This Sartre has the freely, lucidly, harmlessly, one evening, not to gamble anymore. And the choice makes absolutely choice theory. It gets no grip on it. If decision making is completely free, then everything is constantly up for new decisions and up for grabs. So somehow decisions have to be based on something that can't be justified, principles that are justifying what you, because there's always got to really makes the which there has to be a background which, insofar as you have any principle, get to a sense of the justice. Whether that's revelation, there has to be some way which is very hard, freedom, in which when you do something, it doesn't just count as a pretty clear, lucid decision that you make, but it's on the basis about which you are going to be lucid. I don't need to try to find the thing. That's all in this one murky sentence, which says, in fact, it's feeling of environment guilt. This is luckily, the positive feature of dogma that it can't get behind its claim. To me, that sentence has always been so interesting. So he says, every decision bases itself. That's on the basis. Bases itself on, well, every decision bases itself on something not mass lucid choice. Otherwise, he won't get a grip on it. We're going to a redress and go into a sort of self. So what does this mean? It means somehow we all what did it? And now it turns out that thank goodness we do. Like we people quote. What I don't have it there either. Well, I can find it. Something trying to quote me. Oh boy. Guilt. That's amazing. Guilty. That sounds about like a should be. Well, yes, that's the case. Thank you. Okay, so all of this is going on the 30th. And this is, now we're going to find out what what ontological guilt is. So we started thinking with Owen something about ability and the rules. We find out what it is, that it's, I can tell you that it's a positive thing, and that's what he does here. But let's look at these claims. It's all about the on the basis. Starting about
320 or 330?
330. Starting it has been delivered over. This is what it is to be guilty. As such, it can exist only as an entity which is thus delivered. It is existing the basis of its ability to be, although it has not been reposed in the weight of it. Now to go on. And how is dogma into which it's been thrown? The self which has to lay the basis for itself can never underline and get that basis into itself. And yet, as existing, it must take over being the basis. To be its own basis is the ability to be the issue of change. Then to speak a little more to get the punchline. It's being the basis, existing as throwing dogma constantly lags behind responsibility. It never exists before them as this basis. Then now, thus being the basis, one's almost being ground up, which not belongs with the central meaning of throwingness. Being itself being the basis is a nullity of itself. That is that sense that you can't be a kind. You can never become your own being. You can. That's what it is. That's what guilt really is. It has nothing to do with having done anything wrong, lacking anything, owing anything. And it's not because you're falling short of being a kind. There's something wrong with us without a kind. No, it's not something wrong with us. It's just the structure of a being that is on a background and always has to be as a figure that has to always act on that background. And that's a structure. It's not recognizable. Nobody in their right mind, no ordinary, everyday person would understand the world we're talking about. Said, well, guilt, everybody's got it, everybody's got the same amount of it. You don't want to get rid of it, it's really a positive good thing. But that's how it turns out. When you think to be the opposite, it turns out to be the opposite of what you would have thought. That is, you would have thought you did something else. So forth. And you can do that stuff. But what's ontological is this structural. Oh yeah, fine. And the final reform indication is that it's covered up this fully. You can't take responsibility. You have to take responsibility for it even though you don't know what it is. Weird. That gives you the anxiety of guilt. What I just described. Now, then you can see the last no reform indication. And why do people think it doesn't be justified and feeling guilty if you fall short of what you ought to do? Well, all that is a cover-up now because it isn't a case of clarity rules. Those things come in to cover up what it really is. But those things are truly telling you the whole formula. If what's there, and there's always something serious, derealization. Okay, I think I said